They sat me at table 15, tucked behind a gilded screen dripping with roses. As if I were an afterthought, they hoped the guests wouldn't notice. I adjusted my simple navy dress, smoothed my silver hair, and smiled like the harmless retired schoolteacher I was supposed to be. But inside, I was already counting the moves in this little chess game. The charming young woman who'd just married my son had no idea what kind of storm she was walking into. 3 days later, she'd be standing at my door with a folder full of papers that would make me chuckle for months. If you're listening to this, drop a comment and let me know where you're tuning in from. I'm Eleanor Grayson, 68 years old, widowed for 3 years, and until that wedding, I'd done a fine job of keeping my secrets under wraps. What Vivian Carver didn't know was that this unassuming former teacher was sitting on a fortune $25 million, to be exact, left by my late husband, Richard, and I wasn't about to let anyone, not even my new daughter-in-law, get their hands on it. That morning had started with a quiet kind of hope. I'd spent an hour at the local salon, getting my hair pinned up just so not too fancy. Mind you, just enough to look like I still cared about appearances. My navy dress was modest, the kind you'd expect from a woman who'd spent 30 years teaching third graders how to read and tie their shoes. I wore my mother's silver earrings, small and elegant, the only jewelry I'd kept from her estate. They whispered dignity without screaming wealth, perfect for the occasion. When I arrived at the hotel ballroom, my son James greeted me with a quick hug and a distracted, "You look nice, Mom." Nice. Like I was a potted plant that hadn't wilted yet. He was too busy fussing over some last-minute crisis with the caterer to notice the sting in his words. I watched him hurry off, his tuxedo crisp, his smile bright as he stood beside Vivian, who floated in a cloud of ivory silk that must have cost more than my old station wagon. She was radiant, no question, her dark hair cascading in perfect waves, her laughter lighting up the room. For a moment, I let myself believe this was the happy ending James deserved. But then the guests started arriving, and the room sorted itself into a hierarchy as clear as a schoolyard playground. Vivian's parents, Margaret and Henry Carver, swept in like they owned the place. Margaret was a vision of excess, draped in an emerald gown, her neck glittering with enough jewels to fund a small country. She glided through the crowd, air-kissing the right people, nodding at the useful ones, and looking straight through me like I was part of the wallpaper. I caught her eye once, offered a polite smile. She returned it with a glance so brief, it might have been an accident. "Excuse me," I said to the hairy usher, holding up my seating card. "I think there's been a mix-up. Table 15. He barely looked at me. "No mistake, ma'am. Right over there, behind the decorative screen." Decorative screen, that's what they called it. A gilded monstrosity covered in roses and ivy, designed to hide me from view while still technically including me. I made my way to my exile, weaving through a sea of clinking champagne glasses and forced laughter. Table 15 offered a perfect view of nothing but foliage, with a side of muffled conversation. From my little fortress of flowers, I could just make out the festivities in the mirrored wall across the room. There I was, Eleanor Grayson, 68 years of hard-earned wisdom, tucked away like yesterday's lesson plan. The ceremony itself was lovely, I'll give them that. James looked every bit the proud groom, his eyes locked on Vivian as she walked down the aisle. She was a vision, her gown catching the light like something out of a storybook. For a moment, I forgot this thing of table 15 and let myself feel the joy of a mother watching her son start a new chapter. But then, during the cocktail hour, I noticed something about my new daughter. Vivian had a repertoire of smiles, each one tailored to its recipient. A dazzling grin for the wealthy guests, all charm and sparkle. A polite nod for the useful ones, caterers, photographers, anyone who could make her life easier. And for people like me, the ones who didn't seem to offer anything, a blank stare, like she was looking at a chair instead of a person. It was fascinating, really, like watching a predator size up her territory. "Mrs. Grayson," she said, gliding over to me with a smile so bright it could have powered the "Isn't this just perfect?" She gestured at the ballroom, as if she'd personally arranged the sunset outside. "You must be so proud of James." "Oh, I'm positively glowing with maternal pride," I replied, my voice sweet as honey, but sharp enough to cut if you listened closely. "The view from here is quite revealing." She either missed the edge in my tone, or chose to ignore it, her smile never faltering. "We should have dinner soon," she said. "Get to know each other properly. Family's so important, don't you think?" Family. The word hung in the air like a promisor, a threat. I nodded, still smiling, and thought to myself, oh, Vivian, you have no idea what kind of family you've just married into. As the wedding reception swirled around me, I sat behind my floral barricade, sipping lukewarm champagne and watching Vivian Carver work the room like a conductor leading an orchestra. She was good, I'll give her that. Every gesture, every laugh, every perfectly timed hair flip was calculated to charm. But I'd spent 30 years teaching kids how to spot a fibbert. Third graders aren't exactly master liars, but they'll try to sell you a story about a dog eating their homework with the same conviction Vivian was using on the wealthy guests, and I could see through it just as easily. Mrs. Grayson, she said, gliding back to my table after dazzling a group of investors in tailored suits. Her smile was megawatt, the kind she reserved for people she thought might matter later. You're looking so comfortable back here. Comfortable like I was a cat curled up in a sunbeam, not a mother-in-law banished to the cheap seats. Oh, I'm just soaking it all in, I said, my voice sweet as pie but with a little bite. If you knew where to listen. It's quite a show from this angle. Her eyes flickered, just for a second, like she wasn't sure if I was playing along or poking at her. But she recovered fast, leaning in like we were old friends sharing a secret. I was thinking, she said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial hush. We should really spend some time together, get to know each other. James says you're all on your own in that big house, and I'd hate for you to feel overwhelmed. Overwhelmed. The word landed like a pebble in a pond, rippling with implications. I tilted my head, letting her think I was just a sweet old lady trying to keep up. That's so thoughtful of you. Dear, I replied, folding my hands in my lap. Most people don't bother with their in-laws until after the honeymoon. That got a tiny pause in her smile. Barely a hiccup, but I caught it, like a kid who'd been caught passing a note in class. What did you have in mind? Dinner, maybe. Just the two of us. Somewhere cozy. I know, a lovely place downtown, quiet, perfect for real conversation. Her eyes sparkled with sincerity, but I'd seen that look before. It was the same one little Tommy Jenkins used when he swore he'd only borrowed my stapler, not stolen it. Cozy sounds wonderful, I said, fanning myself lightly with my napkin like I was flustered by her attention. I'm free Thursday. Does that work for your busy schedule? She beamed, clearly thinking she'd reeled me in. Perfect. I'll make reservations. 7 o'clock? 7 it is, I agreed, and as she floated away to charm another guest, I caught my reflection in the mirrored wall across the room. Silver hair, navy dress, silver earrings glinting softly. I looked like someone who clipped coupons and worried about her heating bill. Exactly the image I'd been cultivating since Richard passed. Nobody looks twice at a retired school teacher living modestly in a small town, and that was just how I liked it. If you're wondering why I didn't call her out right then and there, it's because I've learned a thing or two in 68 years. You don't confront a snake until you know where its fangs are. And Vivian, she was definitely a snake, slithering through the grass with a smile that could sell ice to a snowman. The days after the wedding dragged like a Monday morning with no coffee. James called once, gushing about how wonderful Vivian was, how she was already planning their future financial security. A big house, the works. She's so good at this stuff, Mom, he said, his voice bright with trust. She's got a head for numbers. Numbers. The word stuck in my throat like a piece of stale bread. That's lovely, sweetheart, I said. A wife who's good with money is romantic. He laughed, missing the sarcasm completely, which was probably for the best. By Wednesday, I was itching to know what Vivian was really after. I'd been replaying her words in my head, the way she'd lingered on, overwhelmed. The way her eyes had scanned me like she was pricing out my worth. Richard used to warn me about people like that. Ellie, he'd say, his voice soft, but serious, there are folks out there who see a widow as an opportunity. Promise me you'll keep your eyes open. I'd promised, and I'd kept them open. Wide open. Thursday evening arrived with all the charm of a parent-teacher conference gone wrong. I dressed the part in another simple dress, this one charcoal, gray, paired with Richard's old watch, the one that stopped ticking years ago but still looked respectable. The restaurant Vivian picked was one of those places where the menu has no prices, and the waiters look at you like you're personally responsible for their unfulfilled dreams. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table, her silk blouse catching the candlelight like she was posing for a magazine cover. Eleanor, she said, standing to give me a hug that felt more like a pat-down, you look wonderful. So, Classic, classic, like I was a dusty old book nobody bothered to read anymore. Thank you, dear, I said, settling into my chair. This place is quite something. Oh, it's my favorite, she said, waving a hand like she dined here every week. Perfect for important conversations. Important conversations. The phrase landed like a warning bell. I smiled and ordered a glass of wine, something affordable, to keep up appearances. Vivian insisted on a bottle with a name I couldn't pronounce, swirling her glass like she'd been born with a sommelier's license. So, she began, leaning forward, how are you managing, all alone, in that house? It must be so much to handle. Her voice dripped with concern, but her eyes were sharp, like she was waiting for me to confess I was drowning in bills. Oh, I get by, I said, keeping my tone light. 30 years of wrangling ate certain resilience, she laughed, a practiced little chuckle that probably worked wonders on her clients. She was some kind of financial consultant. James had told me, though he was vague on the details. Resilience is wonderful, she said, but surely it gets overwhelming sometimes. All those decisions, the upkeep, the finances. There it was, the first crack in her mask. I tilted my head, playing the slightly confused widow. Finances, oh, I don't worry too much about those. Richard left me comfortable enough. Comfortable, a word that could mean anything from a modest pension to a private island. I watched her eyes light up, just for a second, before she caught herself, of course, she said, sipping her wine. But it's so easy for things to get complicated, especially for someone in your position, my position. Like being a widow was a medical diagnosis. And what position would that be, dear? I asked, my voice soft but with just enough edge to make her pause. She leaned in closer, her tone turning confidential. The way people do when they're about to sell you something you don't need, living alone, making big decisions without support, being vulnerable to people who might not have your best interests at heart. Vulnerable. The word hung in the air like a challenge. I felt a prickle of anger, but I kept my smile in place, sweet as Sunday morning. How kind of you to worry about my vulnerability, I said, folding my napkin carefully. I hadn't realized it was such a concern. She didn't miss a beat. Oh, Eleanor, I just want to help. James and I were talking, and we think it'd be smart to get some safeguards in place. Legal protections, you know, to keep you safe. Safeguards, protections, the words sounded so noble, but I'd heard enough playground excuses to know a setup when I saw one. What kind of protections? I asked, letting my voice waver just enough to make her think I was nervous. She reached into her purse with the grace of a magician pulling a rabbit from a hat, and slid a manila folder across the table. Just some standard paperwork, she said, her smile as smooth as silk. Power of attorney, financial oversight, maybe medical decision-making. Nothing too serious, just to make sure you're taken care of. Taken care of. Like I was a pet she was planning to board at a kennel. I opened the folder, scanning the documents with the same focus I used to grade spelling tests. Power of attorney, financial control, medical authority. A neat little package designed to hand my life over to her and James, or, more likely, just her. This is thorough, I said, closing the folder and resting my hands on it like I was guarding a treasure. I'll need to think it over. Her smile tightened, just a fraction. Of course, take your time, but my lawyer says it's best to act quickly. You know, before things get complicated. Complicated, like me figuring out what she was really after. I'll talk to my own lawyer, I said, keeping my voice light, just to make sure. I understand it all. My mind's not what it used to be, you know? That was a lie, but it got the reaction I wanted, a flash of triumph in her eyes, like she thought she'd already won. Oh, Eleanor, you don't need to bother with that, she said, leaning forward. We can handle everything. It's what family does. Family. There was that word again, heavy with meaning. I smiled, thinking of Richard's warnings, his quiet voice in the back of my mind. Family's a wonderful thing, I said. I'll let you know soon, dear. As we finished our wine, I could feel her watching me, sizing me up like a jeweler, appraising a stone. Too bad for Vivian. I wasn't just any stone. I was a diamond, sharp enough to cut right through her plans. Driving home from that dinner with Vivian, I felt a familiar knot in my stomach, the kind I used to get when a parent would storm into my classroom demanding to know why their kid got a C on a spelling test. Vivian's folder of papers was sitting on the passenger seat, glaring at me like a bad report card. Power of attorney, financial oversight, medical decisions. It was all so neatly packaged, like a lesson plan designed to fail. But I wasn't one of my third graders, and I wasn't about to let Vivian mark an F on my life. By the time I pulled into my driveway, the quiet of my little house felt heavier than usual. Richard's absence was everywhere, in the creak of the floorboards, the empty armchair by the fireplace, the faint smell of his pipe tobacco that still lingered in the curtains. 3 years since he'd been gone, and I'd spent most of that time playing the part of the modest widow, clipping coupons, driving a beat-up car, keeping my head down. But Vivian's little performance at dinner had lit a spark in me, and I knew it was time to stop pretending. I poured myself a cup of chamomile tea and sat at the kitchen table, staring at the folder. Richard's voice echoed in my mind, clear as the day he'd said it. "Ellie, there are wolves out there, dressed up as family. If anything happens to me, check the study. You'll know what to do." I'd avoided that study for 3 years, too raw from grief to face whatever he'd left behind. But Vivian's smug smile was all the push I needed. The study was just as he'd left it, a time capsule of Richard's life. His desk was cluttered with old science journals, a half-finished crossword puzzle, and a pair of reading glasses that still made my heart ache. I knelt by the bookshelf, my fingers tracing the edge of a panel I'd never noticed before. Richard was always cleverer than he let on, hiding things in plain sight like the puzzles he loved. The panel clicked open, revealing a small safe. My hands trembled as I turned the key he'd left in a locked drawer, the one I'd promised never to open unless I had to. Inside was a stack of documents that hit me like a punch. Bank statements from accounts I'd never heard of, investment records stretching back decades, legal papers setting up trusts I didn't know existed, and at the bottom, a letter in Richard's tidy handwriting, the kind he used when he was grading his students' lab reports. "My dearest Ellie," it began. "If you're reading this, I'm gone, and someone's trying to take advantage of your kind heart. I'm sorry I never told you about the money. $25 million, all yours, protected in a trust no one can touch. $20-5 million. I sat back on my heels, the numbers swimming in front of my eyes like a math problem I couldn't solve. Richard had been a scientist, a quiet man who wore the same tweed jacket for 20 years and drove a car older than James. He'd made his fortune from patents, breakthroughs in medical research he never bragged about. But there was more. The letter went on. "I set up a secret fund, Ellie, not just for you but for the cause. We both cared about education for those who need it most. You'll find the details with Carol Whitaker, my lawyer. She knows everything. Use this money to protect yourself, and if you can, protect others. Don't let anyone steal what we built together. A secret fund, not just money, but a mission." Richard had always believed in teaching people to stand on their own, just like I'd spent my career doing. The idea that he'd left me a way to keep doing that, even after he was gone, made my throat tighten. I wiped my eyes and found a business card tucked in the envelope. "Carol Whitaker, attorney at law." I called her first thing the next morning. "Mrs. Grayson," Carol said when I reached her, her voice crisp but warm, like a principal who actually liked her job. "I've been wondering when you'd call. Richard said this day might come." I explained about Vivian, the dinner, the folder, the way her eyes had gleamed when she talked about protecting me. Carol didn't sound surprised. "Sounds like a classic setup," she said. "I've seen it before. People like her target widows, especially ones they think are alone and vulnerable. Can you come to my office today?" Carol's office was bright and modern, with photos of her kids on the desk and a law degree framed on the wall. She was younger than I'd expected, maybe 50, with a handshake that could crush a walnut. "Eleanor," she said, spreading out a pile of documents, "Richard was a genius at protecting you. That $25 million. It's locked in an irrevocable trust. Nobody can touch it. Not Vivian, not James, not even you unless you're in full control. But there's more. He set up a separate fund for educational programs, specifically for seniors. He wanted you to use it to empower people. Not just protect yourself. Empower people." The words hit me like a bell ringing after a long silence. Richard hadn't just left me money. He'd left me a purpose. "What about Vivian?" I asked. "She's pushing for power of attorney. She thinks I'm an easy mark." Carol's smile was almost predatory. "Then we let her think that. We set a trap. You play along, act like you're considering her plan, and we document everything. I've got contacts at the DA's office. If she's part of a bigger operation, and I'd bet my law license she is, we can take them all down. A trap. The idea made my heart race, not with fear but with something I hadn't felt in years: excitement. I thought of Vivian's smug smile, her folder of lies, the way she looked at me like I was a puzzle she'd already solved. How do we do it? I asked. We start by letting her think she's winning, Carol said. You agree to meet her again, maybe at your house. We'll have cameras, recording equipment, the works. If she's trying to pull a fast one, she'll incriminate herself. And Eleanor, I've seen her type before. They always underestimate women like you. Women like me, 68, silver-haired, a retired teacher who'd spent her life grading papers and wiping noses. Vivian thought she was dealing with a pushover, but she didn't know I'd spent 30 years teaching kids how to think for themselves, how to spot a bully from a mile away. And she definitely didn't know about the $25 million or the fire Richard had left burning in me. Over the next few days, I played my part perfectly. I called James, letting my voice tremble just enough to sound frail. Vivian's been so kind, I said. She's worried about me, says I need help managing things. James, bless his heart, was too smitten to hear the warning in my words. She's just looking out for you, Mom, he said. She's got a good head for this stuff. A good head for stealing, more like. I hung up, thinking of Richard's letter, the trust, the secret fund. Vivian thought she was hunting a helpless widow. She was about to learn that some widows have claws, and a very good lawyer. The week after my meeting with Carl felt like the longest parent-teacher conference of my life, the kind where you know the parent's about to blame you for their kid's bad behavior. I spent my days playing the part of the nervous widow, letting Vivian think she had me right where she wanted me. She called twice, her voice all syrup and concern, asking if I'd thought about the paperwork and offering to come by to help explain it. I'd hum and haw, letting my voice waver like I was just a confused old lady, all while Carol and her team set the stage for our little showdown. Wednesday, 7 o'clock. At your house, Carol had said, her eyes gleaming with the kind of excitement I used to see in kids who'd finally cracked a tough math problem. We'll have cameras hidden in the living room, audio recorders, and a couple of plainclothes officers waiting in the next room. All you have to do is get her talking. She'll hang herself with her own words. I spent Tuesday preparing like I was staging a school play. I chose another simple dress, dark green this time, the color of forest shadows, paired with Richard's broken watch and my mother's silver earrings, the perfect costume for a woman who looked like she couldn't tell a scam from a spelling bee. I dusted the living room, set out a tray of tea and cookies, and practiced my lines in the mirror. Oh, Vivian, I'm so grateful for your help, I'd say, letting my eyes go wide and trusting. 30 years of teaching had made me a decent actress, and I was ready to give the performance of a lifetime. Wednesday evening arrived with a quiet hum of anticipation. At exactly 7, Vivian knocked on my door, her smile as polished as ever. She carried a sleek leather briefcase, the kind that screamed, "I'm important," and wore a tailored blazer that probably cost more than my monthly grocery bill. "Eleanor," she said, stepping inside with a hug that felt like she was checking for hidden wires, "I'm so glad you're ready to move forward. This is going to make everything so much easier for you." "Oh, I hope so," I said, my voice trembling just enough to sell the act. "It's all so overwhelming, you know." I led her to the living room, where the hidden cameras waited like silent witnesses. She settled on the couch, spreading her papers across my coffee table with the confidence of a teacher handing out a pop quiz she knew nobody could pass. "These documents are straightforward," she said, sliding a folder toward me. "Just a few signatures, and James and I can take care of everything: your finances, your medical decisions, even your house if it ever becomes too much." Too much? Like I was one step away from a nursing home. I opened the folder, scanning the pages with a furrowed brow, letting her think I was struggling to keep up. "This is a lot," I said, my voice soft and uncertain. "What happens to my money if I sign these?" Her eyes lit up, just for a moment, like a kid spotting candy. "Your money will be safe," she said, leaning forward, "professionally managed, so you don't have to worry about investments or bills or any of that. James and I will handle it all." "By you and James," I repeated, letting the words hang in the air. "And if I change my mind later?" Her smile tightened, like a string pulled to taut. "Well, that would depend on your mental state at the time." These arrangements are designed to be permanent, for your protection. Permanent, like a life sentence in a prison of her making. I picked up the pen, letting my hand shake slightly, and signed the first page. This feels so official, I said, glancing at her. You're sure this is the best thing? She nodded, her eyes practically glowing with victory. Absolutely, Eleanor. Trust me, this is what's best for everyone. Trust her. The woman who thought I was a mark, a lonely widow with a modest pension she could siphon off. I signed the second page, then paused, setting the pen down. Vivian, I said, my voice suddenly steady. There's something I should probably mention. Her smile faltered, just a flicker. What's that? I leaned back, folding my hands in my lap, and let the mask of the confused widow slip away. I think there might be more money than you realize. Her eyes widened, and I could almost hear the gears turning in her head. More money? She asked, her voice barely hiding her greed. Richard may have left some accounts I didn't know about, I said, watching her closely. Investments, trusts, that sort of thing. Maybe significant amounts. Her hands twitched, like she was trying not to grab the folder and run. Significant how? She asked, her tone sharp now, all pretense of concern gone. I smiled, slow and deliberate, thinking of the $25 million and the trap she'd just walked into. Significant enough to make this little plan of yours a very bad idea. Before she could respond, the door to the dining room opened, and 2 officers stepped out, their badges glinting in the lamplight. Vivian Carver, one of them said. You're under arrest for attempted fraud and conspiracy. Her face went white as chalk, her mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. Eleanor, what is this? She stammered, her briefcase slipping to the floor. This, I said, standing up and brushing imaginary dust off my dress, is what happens when you underestimate a retired schoolteacher with a very good lawyer. As the officers cuffed her, she started babbling about misunderstandings and good intentions, but the cameras had caught every word, every lie, every greedy glance. Carol stepped out from the kitchen, her smile as sharp as a freshly sharpened pencil. Nice work, Eleanor, she said. She didn't see it coming. Neither did James, poor thing. I called him that night, my voice steady but heavy with the truth. Sweetheart, I said, we need to talk about Vivian. I played him the recording, every damning word of her plan to strip me of my independence. He was quiet for a long time, the kind of silence that breaks your heart. Mom, he finally said, his voice cracking. How did I not see this? You loved her, I said, my throat tight. Love makes us blind sometimes, but you deserve better than a liar who'd rob your mother. He showed up at my house an hour later, his eyes red, his shoulders slumped. I sat him down and showed him the financial records Carol had dug up. Vivian's debts, her shady business deals, her history of cozying up to wealthy widows. She wasn't just after me, I said. She's done this before. James stared at the evidence, his face a storm of betrayal and heartbreak. What do I do now, Mom? He asked, sounding like the little boy who'd once asked me how to tie his shoes. You start over, I said, resting my hand on his, with the truth this time. Vivian was charged with attempted fraud, conspiracy, and a laundry list of other offenses. The police found evidence linking her to a network of con artists targeting elderly people across the state. As they led her away in handcuffs, she glared at me, her perfect smile replaced by a snarl. This isn't over, Eleanor, she spat. I smiled back, sweet as the cookies on my coffee table. Oh yes, it is. The morning after Vivian's arrest, I woke up to the kind of quiet I hadn't felt in years. Not the heavy silence of grief, but the calm that comes when you've faced a storm and come out standing. I made my usual pot of coffee, sat at my kitchen table, and stared out at the garden where Richard and I used to sip tea on summer evenings. Vivian was gone, locked up in a cell somewhere, her perfect smile no match for the truth. But the real work was just beginning for me, for James, and for every other person she'd tried to fool. The news hit the local stations by noon. Local financial consultant arrested in elder fraud sting. The headlines blared. They showed Viv mugshot, her polished veneer replaced by a scowl that could curdle milk. I didn't watch for long. Seeing her face only reminded me of the bigger picture. Vivian wasn't just a lone wolf. She was part of a pack, and thanks to Carol and the DA's office, we were about to hunt them all down. Carol called that afternoon, her voice crackling with excitement. Eleanor, the evidence from Vivian's arrest is a goldmine. She's connected to a network of con artists working across 3 states. Bank records, fake contracts, even a list of other targets, most widows like you. We've got enough to start dismantling the whole operation. Dismantling how? I asked, stirring my coffee slowly, picturing Vivian's smug face when she'd slid that folder across my table. Arrests, asset seizures, the works, Carol said. But we need to move fast. These people scatter like roaches when the light comes on. And Eleanor, you're the one who flipped the switch. Her words sent a shiver through me, not of fear, but of purpose. Richard's letter had told me to protect myself and others. This was what he meant. I thought about the $25 million, the trust he'd built from years of quiet brilliance, and the secret fund for senior education he'd tucked away like a gift I hadn't unwrapped yet. What if we used the money? I said, the idea forming as I spoke, not just to fight Vivian's network, but to stop people like her before they start. Education, resources, legal support for seniors. Could we do that? Carol was quiet for a moment, then laughed, a real, warm laugh, not the polished kind Vivian used. Eleanor, with $25 million, you could do just about anything. Let's talk to the DA and set something up. A foundation, maybe, something permanent. By the end of the week, Vivian was charged with attempted fraud, conspiracy, and racketeering. 15 years in prison, no chance of parole for at least 10. The judge didn't mince words. Ms. Carver, he said, staring down at her like she was a student caught cheating on a final exam. You preyed on trust and family ties to exploit the vulnerable. This court ensures you won't do it again. As they led her away, I caught a glimpse of her face on the courtroom feed. No more smiles, just a hard, bitter glare that said she'd underestimated the wrong widow. James took it harder than I expected. He showed up at my house the next evening, looking like he'd aged a decade in a day. His eyes were hollow, his shoulders slumped, like the little boy who'd once cried in my lap because his goldfish didn't make it. Mom, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, how did I miss this? How did I let her into our lives? I poured him a cup of tea and sat across from him, the same way I used to when he'd come home with a skinned knee or a broken heart. You didn't let her do anything, sweetheart, I said. She was good at what she did. Professional liars always are. But you're not her victim, you're my son, and you're stronger than you know. He stared into his cup, his fingers tracing the handle. I trusted her. I thought she loved me. The pain in his voice cut deeper than I expected. I reached across the table, resting my hand on his. She loved what she thought she could get from you. There's a difference. And now you know the truth that's worth more than a comfortable lie. James filed for divorce the next day, citing fraud and irreconcilable differences. It wasn't easy. He had to untangle their shared accounts, their fancy apartment, the life he'd thought they were building. But he moved back to town, renting a small place a few blocks from mine. I watched him rebuild, step by step, the way I used to watch my students learn to read, one word at a time. Meanwhile, I got to work with Carol. We set up the Grayson Foundation, funded by Richard's trust and his secret education fund. The mission was simple: protect seniors from fraud and teach them how to protect themselves. We hired lawyers, investigators, and educators to run workshops across the state, showing people how to spot scams, manage their finances, and fight back. Within a month, we'd helped recover $500,000 for other victims of Vivian's network. Within 3 months, we'd shut down 2 more operations, with 7 arrests and counting. The best part, the stories that started coming in, letters from widows who'd taken our workshops and caught scammers before they could strike, phone calls from families who'd learned to ask the right questions. One woman, a retired nurse named Clara, wrote to thank me for saving her life savings from a financial advisor who sounded suspiciously like Vivian. You gave me back my confidence, she wrote. I'm not afraid to say no anymore. Those letters made me think of Richard, of the trust he'd left me, of the purpose he'd known I'd find. He'd built a fortune to keep me safe, but he'd also given me a way to make others safe. Vivian had thought she was hunting a helpless old lady. Instead, she'd awakened a teacher with a classroom bigger than she could have imagined. James started volunteering with the foundation, helping with outreach and sharing his own story to warn others. One evening, as we sorted through thank notes from seniors we'd helped, he looked at me and said, "Mom, I'm proud of you. Dad would be, too." I smiled, thinking of Richard's letter, his quiet faith in me. He knew I'd figure it out, I said. He always did. Vivian's trial was the end of one chapter, but the Grayson Foundation was the start of something much bigger. I wasn't just fighting for myself anymore. I was fighting for Clara, for every widow who'd ever been underestimated, for every senior who deserved to live without fear. And with $25 million behind me, I was just getting started. 6 months after Vivian's conviction, I stood in my garden, watching the roses Richard had planted years ago bloom brighter than ever. The Grayson Foundation was thriving, with workshops running in 10 states and over $1 million recovered for victims of elder fraud. Every letter we received, every thank you call from a widow who'd reclaimed her savings, felt like a nod from Richard, a quiet "well done, Ellie" from wherever he was. But the real surprise came on a crisp October morning, when Carol called with news that made my coffee taste like victory. "Eleanor," she said, her voice buzzing with excitement, "you've been nominated for the National Citizen Service Award. The ceremony's in Washington, and they want you to speak. The whole country's going to hear what you've done. A national award. For me, a retired school teacher who'd spent her life grading spelling tests and breaking up playground fights." I laughed, thinking of Vivian's face when she first sized me up as an easy mark. "What do they want me to say?" I asked. "Tell them how you turned a con artist's scheme into a movement," Carol said. "Tell them how you made predators afraid of widows." That idea stuck with me, like a lesson plan that writes itself. I wasn't just Eleanor Grayson anymore. I was someone who'd changed the game for every senior who'd ever felt invisible. The ceremony was held in a grand hall, all marble columns and chandeliers, with James sitting beside me, his eyes shining with pride. I wore a navy suit, sharp and simple, with Richard's old watch on my wrist for courage. When they called my name, I walked to the podium, my heart pounding like it did the first time I stood in front of a classroom. "Mrs. Eleanor Grayson," the presenter announced, "for her extraordinary work in protecting seniors from financial predators and empowering them to fight back." I looked out at the crowd: senators, activists, people who'd probably never clipped a coupon in their lives, and thought of Table 15, hidden behind that gilded screen at James's wedding. 2 years ago, I began, my voice steady but warm. I was a widow trying to keep my head down, tucked away at my son's wedding like an embarrassment nobody wanted to see. Someone thought they could take advantage of that thought. Was too old, too alone, too trusting to fight back. They were wrong. The room was quiet, every eye on me. When a predator came for my independence, I found something my husband left me: not just money, but permission to be dangerous. And I decided that if I could fight back, so could every other senior out there. I looked straight into the cameras, knowing Vivian might be watching from her prison cell. To anyone who thinks elderly people are easy targets, hear this: we're watching, we're organized, and we're not afraid of you anymore. The applause was deafening, rolling through the hall like a wave. James squeezed my hand as we sat down, whispering, "Dad would have loved that." I smiled, thinking of Richard's letter, his trust in me to turn his fortune into a shield for others. "He knew I'd get here," I said. "He always did." After the ceremony, the media swarmed. I gave interviews to every major network, repeating the same message: seniors aren't victims unless they choose to be. The Grayson Foundation expanded, with programs launching in Canada and the UK, teaching seniors how to spot scams and stand their ground. Fraud reports dropped by nearly half, not because fewer crimes were happening, but because predators were scared. Carol told me she'd overheard a wiretap where one con artist warned another, "Steer clear of widows. You might end up with a Grayson situation." A Grayson situation. I laughed so hard I nearly spilled my tea. But the real twist came a month later, when I opened a letter from a woman named Susan Miller. She was a victim of Vivian's network, a retired librarian who'd nearly lost her savings to a financial advisor with the same slick smile. "Dear Mrs. Grayson," she wrote, "you don't remember me, but I was in your 3rd grade class in 1978. You taught me to read, to question, to stand up for myself. When I heard about your foundation, I knew it was used, teaching, still, changing lives." Susan Miller, little Susie, with her pigtails and her love for Nancy Drew books. I sat down hard, tears blurring the page. All those years in the classroom, I'd thought I was just teaching kids to read and write. But Richard had known better. He'd left me a legacy to keep teaching, to keep empowering, to turn every Susan Miller into someone who could fight back. I called her the next day, and we talked for hours about her life, her loss, and how the foundation had helped her recover every penny. "You're still my favorite teacher," she said, and I cried all over again. That night, I sat in my garden, holding Richard's letter, the one that had started it all. Vivian had thought she could steal my independence, but she'd given me something far greater, a purpose that matched my resources. She'd awakened a part of me I didn't know existed, the part that could turn a retired schoolteacher into a national hero. And Susan's letter reminded me why it mattered. Every senior we helped, every scam we stopped, was a lesson taught, a life changed. Life doesn't stop teaching you just because you're older. Sometimes, the hardest moments, betrayal, loss, being underestimated, are the ones that show you who you really are. Richard left me $25 million, but the real gift was his belief that I could be dangerous. And to every one of you listening, here's what I've learned. You're never too old to fight back, to stand tall, to protect what's yours. The world might try to hide you behind a screen of roses, but you've got the power to step out and make them see you. So stand up, be dangerous, and let the predators know they picked the wrong fight. Thank you for listening. If you've got a story about standing up to someone who underestimated you, share it in the comments. Your voice matters.